One day while visiting my grandparents, I noticed Grandad working in his garden. I asked Grandma if I could go and see him. She said yes, of course you can. When I went out into the garden, he was busy digging one of the borders. "Hello, how are you?" he said. I answered, "I'm fine, you look busy. What are you doing?" Grandad said, "I'm preparing the ground for some new flowers." I've always liked Grandad's garden. In the summertime it always looked very colourful and tidy. The roses were just coming into bud, promising a lovely display later in the year. It was springtime, which is always a busy time in the garden. I was interested in growing something myself, and Grandad was always happy to answer any of my questions. I asked him if I could use a small patch of ground to grow some plants. "I've got just the thing for you," Grandad said. "It's a raised bed that I built last year." So he took me over to see this small patch of ground raised up with thick wooden sleepers and filled with soil. It was about 8 feet by 4 feet. "Thank you," I said. "This will be great." Grandad said, "You'll need to feed the ground first before you grow anything. Come with me and we'll get you some compost." He went into his shed and came out with a wheelbarrow and spade. "Okay, follow me," he said. We then walked over to his compost heap at the bottom of the garden, which was housed inside 4 wooden panels. Grandad took off the front panel and said, "Just fill up the wheelbarrow to halfway." I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "It's just dirt," I said. Grandad laughed and looked surprised. "What do you think dirt is? The leaves fall from the trees and rot over the years. That makes the soil that things grow in. By putting all the weeds and garden waste into one pile speeds up the process. Some gardeners call this black gold." I felt a bit silly not knowing this. "It's okay," he said. "We all learn as we go along," and patted me on the back. We finished covering the flower bed. Then Grandad suggested I could get myself a drink and he would dig in the compost while I was gone. As I was heading towards the house, I noticed some tulips in the garden and thought, I'm sure Grandma would like one of these for her kitchen. So I picked one on the way into the house. Grandma said, "Thank you, that's lovely." But when I saw some of the other flowers in another room, I realised I'd only picked the flower and not the stem. My tulip was just floating on the water at the top of the vase, but Grandma seemed pleased with it. After finishing my drink, I thought I'd better get back to Grandad. When I got back to him, he was nearly finished digging in the compost. "Now, what would you like to grow?" he said. "Well, something colourful, something that I can take home to my mother." Grandad said, "Some sweet peas would be nice. We'll have to put some sticks in the ground for them to grow up. I have some runner bean sticks left over. Those will do the job." So we put the sticks in the ground and tied them together at the top. Grandad disappeared into his greenhouse and came back holding a tray of plants. He said, "I always sow more than I need, in case some fail to grow. You can have these if you like," and handed me the tray. He said now is a good time to plant these, as it's just about the right time of year. The raised bed was just right. I could reach all of the sticks from the sides without stepping into the flower bed. Grandad said, "Plant them all at the same depth in the ground as they were in the tray," which was a bit of a fiddle for me. So I got to work planting all of the sweet peas. This will be great when they've grown, I thought to myself. I can't wait to see them. Just as I'd finished, Grandma called out, "It's time for you to go home for your tea." So I went inside, washed my hands and thanked them for what they'd done for me. When I got home, I told my mother what I'd been doing at Grandad's. She suggested that we could go to a garden centre tomorrow to get some flowers, to add to my new garden patch at Grandad's. The next day we arrived at the centre. There were so many plants there, flowers of all colours, big and small, vegetables, fruits, and an orange tree right in the middle of the garden centre with a wide path around its edge. Mum took me to a very colourful section. I had no idea what all the flowers were, but Mum seemed to know what she was putting in the trolley. I did suggest one plant and pointed to it, but Mum said that it would grow far too big for my patch of ground. Well, I didn't know. This was all new to me. On the way out we picked up some plant food. Mum said, "What with this and your Grandad's compost, your plants will be growing in no time." The next day I arrived with the plants at Grandad's. When he saw them, he said, "Oh, you're having a cut flower bed and vegetables. Your mother has chosen some nice flowers. She'll need some more vases to put them in once they've grown." I said, "Yes, I'm sure she'll like these," and got to work planting them. Halfway through putting in the plants, I decided to have a break, so I had a wander to the end of the garden. I noticed a vine growing over from a neighbour's side of the fence. It was growing over the budding rhododendron on our side of the garden. I mentioned this to Grandad, and he said, "Oh dear, we don't want that. We'll have to cut it back a little. Once we've cut it, we might even get some grapes." While Grandad was busy with that, I thought I'd better finish with my planting. Just as I'd finished, and was admiring my handiwork, Grandad came over and said, "Well, you've done a good job there. Now we just need to wait and see what happens." I asked him, "How long will it be before I can pick some flowers, Grandad?" He laughed and said, "It all depends on the weather. Maybe, if we're lucky, you'll be taking some flowers home to your mother in a few weeks' time." Well, it was a lovely warm summer, and Grandad was quite right. The flowers started to bloom in just a few weeks. I was often there cutting flowers. Mum was very pleased, and she did buy another vase. I wonder what I should grow next year. Perhaps some more colourful flowers, or some tomatoes, or maybe some delicious tasty strawberries, or maybe, well, maybe I'll decide next year in the springtime.